She came home for a forgotten laptop. That was all it was supposed to be. 15 minutes, in and out, back to the office before her 2 o'clock call. She did not expect to hear the shower running. She did not expect to open the bathroom door and find her husband and her best neighbor friend standing in a cloud of steam, Ryan's hand still on Dana's waist, both of them so startled they couldn't form a single word. She did not expect any of that. But what happened next? That part she had practiced without knowing it her entire professional life. She quietly closed the door. She went to the kitchen. She made a cup of coffee. She sat down at the table and began to think. 3 weeks later, Ryan Bliss did not own a single thing he believed he'd secured. And Dana Sweet stood in a neighbor's living room holding a tray of lemon cupcakes while every person in the room stared somewhere slightly above her head, and no one, not one person, reached out to take one. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. I have lived in the Saguaro Ridge subdivision of Chandler, Arizona for 6 years. 6 years of triple-digit summers and HOA newsletters and block parties where someone always brings too much potato salad and somebody's dog always finds it. 6 years of terracotta roof tiles and desert landscaping and the particular golden light that falls across the Sonoran evenings when the heat finally breaks around 7:30 and the whole neighborhood smells like warm citrus and cooling asphalt. I loved that neighborhood. I want to be clear about that. I genuinely, wholeheartedly loved it because that matters. The things you love are the things that can be used against you. My name is Nora Cash. I am 36 years old. I work as a senior tax consultant and forensic accountant at a mid-size firm called Meridian Advisory Group, which means my entire professional life is built around one central premise. Money does not lie. People lie. Paperwork gets altered, documents get backdated, explanations get complicated and emotionally persuasive, and sometimes even technically coherent. But money moves in traceable patterns, and those patterns, if you know how to read them, tell you exactly what happened and exactly who made it happen. I have been doing this job for 11 years. I am, by most reasonable measures, very good at it. I tell you this not to brag, but because it matters. It matters in ways I did not fully understand until the day I came home to find my husband in the shower with the woman who had a copper-colored spare key to my front door on a keychain shaped like a little house. Ryan Bliss, 38 years old, 6'1", project manager at a commercial construction firm called Sterling Build Group. He had wide shoulders and an easy smile, and a way of making everyone in the room feel included in whatever he was saying, which I thought for a long time was one of his best qualities, and which I later understood was more of a professional skill than a personal one. He coached youth soccer on Saturday mornings during the fall season, and he grilled excellent brisket, and he remembered everyone's birthday, every single one, always texted a little cake emoji right at midnight. He had been my husband for 4 years. We had been together for 6. We had bought the house together, painted the living room a color called warm linen that took 3 trips to Home Depot to get right, and planted a lemon tree in the backyard that gave us more lemons than 2 people could ever reasonably use. I used to joke that the lemon tree was the most productive member of our household. Our life in Saguaro Ridge was comfortable, in the way that lives built carefully over time become comfortable. Not flashy, not dramatic, just solid. We had routines. I left for work by 7:15, coffee in the travel mug Ryan always filled before I came downstairs, because he didn't have to be at Sterling until 9. He worked from home 2 or 3 days a week, which had been a pandemic-era arrangement that never quite went away. I appreciated the quiet of the office. I am better in silence. Numbers need silence, or at least I do. We had friends in the neighborhood the way you have friends in a neighborhood. People you wave to, people you stand at the fence with for 20 minutes and genuinely enjoy, people you'd call in an actual emergency. There were block parties twice a year, one in spring and one just before Thanksgiving, and somebody always organized a holiday lights competition in December that got more competitive every year. We had a small circle of people we actually socialized with. The Garcias from the end of the street, Brad and Jennifer Kowalski 2 houses over, and Dana and Greg Sweet directly across the cul-de-sac from us. Dana Sweet, 34 years old, trim and bright-eyed, with dark hair she always wore in a ponytail, and an infectious laugh that arrived slightly before whatever she found funny. She made lemon cupcakes with cream cheese frosting from scratch and brought them to every neighborhood event without fail. And if you complimented them, she would give you the recipe on a little handwritten card she kept in her purse. She was the kind of woman who kept a recipe card in her purse. You know the type. You have liked this type. You have trusted this type, probably more than once. I liked Dana enormously. She had moved into the neighborhood about a year after Ryan and I, and we'd become friendly in the way that people do when they live 40 feet apart and both spend too much time in their front yards in the early morning. She and Greg came to our housewarming, the second one, after the paint finally dried, and she'd brought those cupcakes, and Ryan had eaten 4 of them, and I'd laughed and said that was probably some kind of record. Greg worked for an oil field services company and was away on rotation 3 weeks out of every 6. He was a big, quiet man with a genuine handshake who called me Nora Girl in an affectionate way that should have been annoying and wasn't. I liked Greg too. About 3 years into our friendship, Dana and I had what she called our spare key ceremony, which she announced with great solemnity while standing at my front door in yoga pants and a baseball cap. She handed me a key to her house on a keychain that said, Casa Suite. I gave her a key to mine, copper-colored, cut fresh at the hardware store, on a keychain with a little brass house charm I'd bought on a whim. She'd said, Mi casa es tu casa, Nora. That's what neighbors are for. And I had meant it exactly as much as she had, which I believe was entirely at the time. That key. I want you to keep that key in mind. My best friend, not a neighbor friend, a real friend, the kind you can call at any hour and she will answer slightly irritated and then completely present, was a woman named Kit Bramble. Kit was 35, 5'3", a freelance graphic designer who worked from home in a house about 10 minutes away, and she operated in a permanent state of warmth and high-voltage profanity that somehow made her the most calming presence in any room. She had short auburn hair and paint on her hands most of the time, and a directness that could make doctors nervous. We had met 7 years ago in a spin class we both hated and bonded over our mutual refusal to return after the first session. For the past 2 years, Kit and I had been playing pickleball twice a week at the Desert Mesa Community Center, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 7 to 8:15, before the over 60 crowd arrived and claimed the courts for the entire rest of the day. Kit had convinced me to try it by describing it as tennis for people who have things to live for, and I had laughed and then discovered I loved it with an intensity that surprised me. There is something about the sound a pickleball paddle makes on contact, a crisp, decisive pop that suits a certain personality type. I suspect you can guess which type. Kit was the first person I called after I closed the bathroom door. But that comes later. First, the warning signs, the ones I missed or half noticed and filed away, or noticed completely and chose to explain in whatever terms required the least amount of action. I am a forensic accountant. I find discrepancies for a living, and I missed them in my own house for 8 months, which tells you something not about my professional skills, those were fine, but about the specific blindness that descends when you live inside something. You stop auditing the things you love. You extend trust the way you extend credit to someone with a long history of on-time payments, automatically, without review. The signs were there. Looking back, they form a clear and damning picture. In the moment, each one had a reasonable explanation, and I gave it one, because that's what you do. Ryan started going to the gym again in late February. This seemed like a good thing. He'd been talking about going back for months. Trying to get back into it, you know how it is, he'd said one morning, already in his gym clothes, already half out the door. I said something supportive. I meant it. He went 4-5 times a week after that, which seemed like a lot, but again, he'd talked about wanting to get back into it, so I didn't question the enthusiasm. There was a new cologne, Bleu de Chanel. I recognized it from a client event I'd attended where it had been everywhere. It's a fine cologne, a cologne you wear when you want someone to notice you. Getting fancy on me? I'd said once, reaching up to straighten his collar before dinner. He'd smiled that wide, included in the joke smile, and said something about trying to smell less like a construction site. I'd laughed. I'd smoothed his collar. I'd gone to get the wine. Dana started coming over more often. This also seemed fine. Greg was away. She got lonely. She'd knock on the door with wine or leftovers or just herself, and we'd sit on the back patio while the lemon tree rustled in the evening wind, and we'd talk about neighbors and work and the HOA's ongoing war over the acceptable height of mailbox decorations. Ryan was always home on those evenings, always perfectly, easily present, refilling glasses, making us laugh. The three of us had a comfortable dynamic, or what looked like one, or what I believed looked like one, which in retrospect were 3 completely different things. There was one afternoon in April. I came home early. A client had canceled. I had no reason to stay at the office. It was around 2 o'clock. Dana's car was in our driveway. I walked in to find her and Ryan in the kitchen. Ryan was making sandwiches. His hair was wet. "Just got back from a run," he said, not missing a beat, already reaching for the mustard. Dana was at the counter slicing tomatoes, comfortable and familiar in my kitchen, and she turned and smiled and said, "Nor, I was just stealing your husband for lunch. Hope that's okay." It had seemed okay. He ran, he showered, his friend was over. Everything had a face it could wear. I still want to go back to that afternoon sometimes, not to scream, not even to confront, just to look at my own face in whatever reflection was available and see what I was actually seeing as opposed to what I chose to see. The money thing, that one I almost caught. In March, I remember it was March because we just filed a complicated S-Corp return for a client, and I was deep in Q1 numbers. Ryan mentioned over dinner that he'd moved some savings around. Just restructuring things a little. It doesn't make sense to have everything sitting in the joint account earning nothing. I'd looked up from my phone. I'd said, "Restructuring how?" And he'd said something vague about a higher yield account he'd read about. And I'd said, "Okay, just make sure you document the transfer properly for tax purposes." And he'd nodded, and I'd looked back at my phone, and I let it go. I let it go because I trusted him. I let it go because I was tired. I let it go because the idea that Ryan, my husband of 4 years, who I watched eat 4 of my neighbor's cupcakes at a housewarming party and thought, "This man is honest. This man is mine." The idea that he might be moving money deliberately and deceptively was simply not a thought I was equipped to have sitting at my own dinner table eating grilled salmon. I am not saying this as an excuse. I am saying it because you should know. I am professionally equipped to find financial fraud in multinational corporations, and I missed it in my own kitchen. By about 6 feet and a table. By June, I was aware, in the way you are aware of something you've decided not to examine, that something between us had shifted. Ryan was less interested in me physically. He was more present in the way that people who feel guilty are present. Attentive, pleasant, specifically not absent. He remembered things I said. He did small, nice things. He was performing a marriage instead of living in one. And I had started to feel the slight hollow quality of that performance without being able to name what it was. I told myself we were in a rough patch. I told myself that was normal. I told myself the gym and the cologne and the pleasantness were all signs that he was trying. I gave him the credit. I always gave him the credit. He'd been making on-time payments for 4 years. The morning I came home for the laptop, it was a Thursday in mid-July. The temperature outside was already 103 degrees at 11:30 in the morning. I had a 2 o'clock call I needed slides for. I was halfway to the office when I realized the laptop was still on the kitchen counter, and I did a U-turn on the highway without thinking much about anything at all. The house was supposed to be empty. Ryan had a site visit at a Sterling project in Scottsdale. He'd mentioned it at breakfast, the long drive, probably not home until 6. Dana's car was not in the driveway. Everything was as it should have been. I unlocked the front door with my key and stepped into the cool air and immediately heard the shower. I stood in the entryway for a moment. There was a rational explanation for this. There were several. Ryan's site visit had changed. He was home. He was showering. This was fine. This was a marriage. People come home and shower. I set my bag on the bench by the door. I walked down the hallway. The bathroom door, our master bathroom, our shared space, the one with the rain shower head we'd spent 3 months debating, was not fully closed. There was a gap of maybe 2 inches. Steam crept through it, and from inside came the low murmur of voices. 2 voices. I pushed the door open. I will spare you the most specific details, not out of delicacy, but out of accuracy. What my brain registered in that first half second was not a detailed scene, but a series of separate, disconnected facts. Ryan's back, Dana's hand on his shoulder, the sound of water, the particular way the steam made everything look slightly unreal, slightly diffused, like looking at something through frosted glass. The sharp animal smell of someone else's shampoo mixing with mine in my own shower. They both turned at the sound of the door opening. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I want to tell you that I screamed or cried or said something. I didn't. I looked at them for approximately 3 seconds. I know this because I counted, unconsciously, the way you count thunderclaps after lightning. And then I stepped back and pulled the bathroom door shut. From the other side, Ryan said, "Nora!" And I turned the thumb-turn lock on the outside of the door, the one we'd installed when we had Nora's nephew visiting and needed to keep the cleaning supplies secured. And I heard the click of it engaging, and I walked to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. I know that sounds strange. I put the kettle on, and while I waited for it to heat, I stood at the kitchen counter and stared at the lemon tree through the sliding glass door, at its weight of yellow fruit and its indifference to everything. And I felt something travel through me that I can only describe as a long, slow exhalation. Not of air, but of something I had been holding without knowing I was holding it. A tension releasing, like a file that had been loading for 8 months, finally opening. Ryan knocked on the bathroom door from the inside. Then again, Then, "Nora, please, please just open the door. Let me explain." I made the coffee. Dana was quieter. I heard her voice once, low and indistinct, and then nothing. The shower was still running. Neither of them would turn it off, which I later understood was because they were trying to make as little noise as possible, trying to assess the situation, trying to figure out what I was doing. They were good at assessment, both of them, just not as good as me. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee. I got out my phone. I had a thought, orderly, professional, the kind of thought I have in an audit when I realize the scope of a problem is larger than initial review suggested. And I went to get Ryan's phone. He had left it on the kitchen counter that morning. He always left it on the kitchen counter. He was not a paranoid person, or not paranoid enough, which is a quality I had liked in him and which now saved me considerable effort. The screen was locked, but his passcode was the same one I'd watched him use 100 times, our anniversary date, which either spoke to a sentimental nature or a limited imagination. Both, probably. I unlocked it. I want to pause here for a moment because what happened in the next 15 minutes was not a single discovery, but a sequence of them, each one arriving so quickly on the heels of the last that my brain had to do something I don't think it had ever done before: hold several devastating facts simultaneously, without resolving any of them, just stacking them up and letting them sit there, a pile of information that would take days to fully comprehend. The text messages first. I went to his messages thread with Dana. I expected maybe a week or two. There were 8 months of texts. Not flirtatious at first. At first, they were careful, coded. The way people write when they know they're crossing a line, but are telling themselves they haven't crossed it yet. Then less careful. Then not careful at all. By May, they were not coded. By May, they were making plans for things that had nothing to do with caution. Weekend plans. Plans that involved picking up dry cleaning and arguing about what to have for dinner. The small-scale ordinariness of a relationship that had settled in. I found the apartment search texts in early June. 3 screenshotted listings in a complex in Tempe, about 20 minutes from Saguaro Ridge. Dana: "This one has the big closets." Ryan: "The second bedroom could be an office." Dana: "Or a nursery." Then a laughing emoji. I put the phone face down on the table. I picked up my coffee. I drank some. I turned the phone back over. I went to his banking app. He used the same passcode. People always do. Our joint checking account showed a balance that was correct. Our joint savings account showed a balance that was $21,000 lower than it should have been. I sat with that number. I went to the transaction history. In March, a transfer of $12,000 to an account I didn't recognize. The memo field said investment account. In May, $9,000 more. Same account, different memo. Home renovation. We had not done any home renovation. We had not discussed any home renovation. The lemon tree trim didn't count. I went to the Zillow app, which I'd never opened on Ryan's phone, but which I had reason now to look for. The search history was full. Primarily Tempe, some Mesa, a few results in Gilbert. But there was also a saved listing that was not a search result. There was a saved listing for our house, our address, our home, listed on Tuesday. Asking price $430,000. Listed by a single agent, no co-listing. The agent's name was Mitchell Draper, whose face smiled from the listing photo with great confidence in his own jawline. Our house was for sale. I had not agreed to sell our house. I had not been asked whether I wanted to sell our house. I had not seen any paperwork, discussed any timeline, spoken to any agent. 3 days ago, our house had been quietly listed on Zillow by my husband acting alone, And if I had not come home for a forgotten laptop and turned the thumb-turn lock on the outside of a bathroom door, I might not have known about it for another week or two, by which point offers might already have been on the table. I set Ryan's phone down. I pressed my fingertips to the tabletop and felt the grain of the wood. We'd refinished it ourselves 2 winters ago, sanded it by hand over an entire weekend, Ryan getting sawdust in his hair and me laughing at him. And I thought, okay, Nora, now you know what you're dealing with. From behind the bathroom door, Ryan knocked again. He had given up on the lock and was now trying reason. Nora, I know what you saw. I know how it looks. I need you to open this door so we can talk like adults, okay? Please. Dana was very quiet. I got up. I walked to the bathroom door. From the other side, I heard both of them shift, heard Ryan's voice drop, heard Dana say something too low to make out. I said, "There's water and snacks in the cabinet under the sink. I'll be back in a few hours." I picked up Ryan's phone, my bag, my laptop, the laptop I'd come back for, still sitting on the counter, and I went to my car and I drove to Kit Bramble's house. Kit opened the door in paint-stained overalls with a coffee mug that said, "Mornings are canceled," in large block letters, and took one look at my face and said, "Oh no, no, get in here." I sat at her kitchen table, which was covered in sketches and Pantone swatches and 3 separate empty coffee mugs, and I told her. I told her from the beginning, from the bathroom to the phone to the bank account to the Zillow listing. Kit didn't interrupt me. She refilled my coffee without asking. She made toast that neither of us ate. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, $21,000. So far. I don't know what else is there. And the house is listed. Since Tuesday. Kit set down her mug with a precision that suggested she was managing the force with which she wanted to put it down. Nora, I am going to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. She paused. Did you know, even a little, like in the back? I thought about the wet hair in April, the cologne, the hollow performance of attentiveness. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know it was this. That's different. That is a completely different thing, okay? She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. That's called trusting someone. That's called being a normal person. She paused. I can't believe he used your shower. Your shower, Nora. The audacity of that man is actually kind of staggering. Despite everything, something almost like a laugh moved through me. The rain showerhead was a significant investment. 3 months of debate. She pressed a hand to her forehead. Oh my God. Oh my absolute God. The laughter faded. What are you going to do? I'm going to work. She studied me. Meaning what exactly? Meaning I am going to find out exactly where every dollar went, exactly what that house listing is based on, exactly what legal position he thinks he's in, and exactly what it's going to cost him. I picked up my coffee. This is what I do, Kit. I find money that people thought they hid. Kit looked at me for a long moment, then she nodded. Okay, then that's what we're doing. She leaned back. I do also know a guy who does custom bumper stickers, just so you have options. Not the direction I was thinking. What if we listed Dana's house on Zillow? Better. What if we ordered $800 worth of Domino's pizza to be delivered to Sterling Build Group on Ryan's account? I'll keep it in reserve. What if we... Thursday. Will you play pickleball Thursday? Kit blinked. Obviously. Good. I'll tell you the plan Thursday. I stood up. I had work to do. I drove home at around 4:30. When I opened the front door, Ryan was sitting at the kitchen table. Dana was gone. He was still slightly damp from the shower, and there was a quality of braced readiness about him. Shoulders slightly elevated, hands flat on the table. Like someone who has had several hours to prepare a speech and knows none of the speeches are good enough. He looked at my face and said, "Nora." "Hi." I set my bag on the bench. I went to the refrigerator and got a bottle of water. I was moving at my normal pace, doing normal things, and I watched him try to calibrate what that meant. "We need to talk." "We do." I sat down across from him. I folded my hands on the table. "But not right now, Ryan. I'm tired. I had a long day." He stared at me. "You're okay?" "No, I'm not. But the conversation we need to have is going to take time, and I would like to be rested for it." I picked up my water. "Is there anything you want to tell me right now? Anything immediate?" He opened his mouth and closed it. He was trying to figure out what I already knew. I gave him nothing. "I'm sorry. What happened today? I didn't—" "Not tonight, Ryan." He stopped. We ate dinner in relative quiet. He'd made pasta, which, in retrospect, was either automatic behavior or a conciliatory gesture, or both. I ate it. I complimented the sauce because the sauce was good, and I was not going to let the quality of a marinara become collateral damage. He watched me from across the table with the expression of a man trying to read a document in a language he doesn't speak. I kept my face perfectly neutral. After dinner, he offered to do the dishes, and I said, "That would be great, thank you." And I went to the living room and opened my laptop and started working. Not on work files, on his. I want to explain something about how forensic accounting works, because it matters for what happened next. When you're doing a forensic audit, a real one, the kind that's going to end up in a courtroom or an IRS proceeding, you do not start from the anomaly. You start from the whole. You build the complete picture of normal first, and then you look for what doesn't fit. Because isolated anomalies can be explained. Patterns cannot. Ryan's financial pattern, as I built it over the next 3 days from every account I had access to, and several I found by knowing where to look, was as follows. Beginning the previous October, 9 months ago, Ryan had opened a personal checking account at a regional bank called Copper State Credit Union, a small institution with branches in 3 Phoenix suburbs and a digital presence that was easy to set up without a joint applicant. This account had received, over the 9 months since its opening, transfers totaling $41,200 from our joint savings. Not 21, 41. I sat with that number for a while. I had found the additional $20,000 in a second transfer I'd missed initially, hidden in a larger month's-end reconciliation. He had been careful about the amounts, careful about the timing, careful to space things out. He was not, at the end of the day, careful enough. But he had made an effort, which told me this was not impulsive. This was planned. The night of the second day, I did something I'd been putting off. I went into Ryan's home office, which had been his and only his since we'd moved in, because I worked better in silence and the office had a door. I knew his laptop password. It was his mother's birthday. Not our anniversary. I realize I got that wrong earlier. The phone was our anniversary. The laptop was his mother's birthday. He had 2 passwords, one for each piece of his sentimentality. I opened the laptop. His email. I went to his sent folder. I searched for the name of the Sterling Build Group HR email address first, just to orient myself, get a sense of his professional correspondence. Then I searched for attorney, then lawyer, then divorce. The email was in his drafts folder to an attorney named Lawrence Pell at a firm called Pell and Greer Family Law, dated January 14th of this year. The subject line was initial consultation follow-up, which meant the actual consultation had been in January, 6 months ago. The affair, per the texts, had started in late February. He had consulted a divorce attorney before he had even started sleeping with Dana Sweet. I read the email twice. Then I read it a third time because some documents need to be read 3 times before they stop feeling like they're written in another language. The email asked 3 specific questions. 1. What exposure would he have regarding his wife's higher income in terms of ongoing support payments? 2. If the marital home were listed and under contract before a divorce filing, what claim would his wife have on the proceeds? 3. Could a power of attorney signed by a spouse be used to authorize real estate transactions without their direct involvement in the process? 3 questions. An affair he'd started a month later. A bank account he'd opened 3 months before the email. A house listed on Tuesday. I sat back in his office chair. I looked at the wall above his desk, which he'd hung with a framed aerial photo of the Saguaro Ridge neighborhood, a real estate agent's promotional print from when we'd first moved in. I had always found it slightly cold as a decorative choice. I found it slightly colder now. The power of attorney question. I went to find what he'd found. In our joint files, a shared Google Drive we maintained for household documents, the kind of sensible domestic archive that takes 2 years to set up properly and saves you 6 hours of searching every tax season. There was a file called Home Admin that contained insurance paperwork, contractor quotes, the original mortgage documents. Underneath those, in a subfolder I'd glanced at and not thought about in months, was a document I did not recognize. A limited power of attorney, granting Ryan Daniel Bliss authority to act on behalf of Nora Lynn Cash in matters pertaining to real property transactions. Signed, apparently, by me. Dated February 7th. The date I remembered because I had been on day 4 of a COVID infection that had put my fever at 103 and made the act of reading the cereal box an ambitious cognitive project. Ryan had brought me something to sign on day 4 of COVID. I remembered the pen. I remembered the general shape of the request. Just some insurance stuff, the premium renewal. Take your time. I had signed without reading. I had taken my time badly. I closed the laptop. I sat in his desk chair in the dark for a long time. The house around me was perfectly quiet. Ryan was asleep, or pretending to be asleep, down the hall. The lemon tree outside was a dark shape against the slightly lighter dark of the Arizona night sky. I thought about the question Ryan had asked his attorney in January, about the power of attorney. And I thought about the form I had signed in February. And I thought about the apartment in Tempe with the big closets. And I thought about Dana Sweet's key on a little house-shaped keychain sitting somewhere in Dana Sweet's house, probably on a hook by her front door, probably right where she'd always kept it. And then I thought about something I hadn't thought about yet. I went back to our joint account app, and I looked at the smart home settings, which Ryan had always maintained and I'd never paid attention to because he was better at the tech stuff, and I'd been happy to let him manage it. But the app was on both our phones, and when I navigated to the Smart Lock Access Log, a feature I had not known existed because I'd never had reason to look for it, I found a record of every key used to access our front door going back 18 months. My key, Ryan's key. Ryan's key, Dana's key. Dana's key had been used to access our front door 23 times in the last 8 months. I sat with that number. I had personally been present for 4 of those visits. 4 evenings with wine and lemon tree conversation, and the comfortable triangle of 2 friends and a husband who was not working from home. The other 19 times, I had been at the office. I set my phone down on the desk and pressed the heels of both hands against my eyes and held them there until I stopped seeing anything at all. Not in the way of someone who is going to cry. I was not at that moment going to cry because there is a temperature below grief, and I was sitting in it, cold and clear and completely still. But in the way of someone who needs a moment with no information at all, just darkness, just the inside of her own skull, just the simple present tense fact of breathing. They had been using my house while I worked, while I found other people's money and documented other people's fraud, and drove home to make dinner in a kitchen where my neighbor's hair products were probably in my shower caddy. They had used my house like it was already theirs. I took my hands away from my eyes. I looked at the aerial photo of Saguaro Ridge on Ryan's wall. My house was visible in it, a small, clay-colored square in the upper right quadrant, with a faint smudge where the backyard was that might have been the lemon tree. "Okay," I said to the empty room. "Now I know everything." I called my attorney the next morning. Patricia Steele of Steele Family Law had been recommended to me 3 years ago by a colleague who said, "She's the kind of person you want in your corner." Patricia was 57 years old, with silver hair she wore in a severe updo and reading glasses she kept on a chain around her neck, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have heard everything twice and are not surprised by any of it. Her office was in a mid-rise in downtown Chandler, 4th floor, with a view of the mountains that she appeared to have long since stopped noticing. I sat across from her desk and laid out everything. The affair, the bank account, the Zillow listing, the power of attorney, the attorney email from January. I had printed everything, organized it chronologically, cross-referenced the account numbers. I watched her read. She made small notes on a legal pad. She was methodical and quiet, and when she finished, she took off her reading glasses, let them hang on the chain, and looked at me. "The power of attorney is the most pressing issue." "I know. Is it valid?" "It depends on several factors. Its scope is limited to real property transactions, which means it cannot be used for financial accounts or other matters. But it is potentially sufficient to authorize a real estate listing without your co-signature on the listing agreement." She paused. "What we need to establish is whether you signed it under duress or under circumstances that impaired your capacity to give informed consent." I had 103 fever and didn't read it. She wrote something on her legal pad. "That's a basis for challenge. The question is whether we can establish what you believed you were signing versus what it actually authorized." She looked up. "A POA challenged for incapacity or fraud is contestable. The courts take it seriously." Another pause. "The listing has been active for 4 days. We need a cease and desist to the listing agent, and we need to file for an emergency injunction on the sale before an offer is accepted. That's time sensitive." "How time sensitive?" "Days, not weeks. If an offer comes in and enters contract, we can still stop it, but it gets messier." She set down her pen. "Nora, I want to ask you something directly." She looked at me steadily. "Do you want to preserve the marriage or end it?" I didn't hesitate. "End it." She nodded once. "Then we file for divorce simultaneously with the injunction. That triggers automatic temporary restraining orders on marital assets, which freezes the house sale. He cannot complete a transaction once the divorce is filed." She picked up her pen again. "The missing $41,000 is a separate matter. The divorce proceeding will require full financial disclosure on both sides. If he has hidden marital assets, that will come out in discovery, and the court does not look kindly on it." She allowed herself a small, precise smile. Neither does the IRS if the transfers were improperly documented. I felt something settle in my chest. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The satisfaction of a structure becoming visible, a problem that has been a fog resolving into a shape that can be engaged with directly. I can document the transfers in a forensic accounting format: chain of custody, account reconciliation, timeline of movement, the same format I use for corporate fraud cases. Patricia Steele looked at me for a moment with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite satisfaction, but something between them. That would be useful, yes. Thursday morning, Kit and I were on the pickleball court at 7. The desert air was still breathable, the low end of bearable, 91 degrees at 7 in the morning, which counts as cool in Chandler in July. The courts were empty at this hour, except for us and an older man on the far end working on his serve with the focused displeasure of someone who has been working on this serve for years. Kit played hard even when she was talking, which was one of the things I liked about her. She didn't go easy on you because you were going through something. She hit the ball where you had to reach for it, made you work, kept you present in your body while your mind was doing whatever it was doing. So, tell me where we are. I hit a cross-court shot and gave her the summary: the POA, the injunction, Patricia Steele, the $41,000, the apartment in Tempe, the Zillow listing going dark in the next 48 hours thanks to the cease and desist. Kit caught a ball one-handed, held it. He was planning this in January, before the affair started. Jesus Christ. What I don't fully know yet is how much Dana knew about the financial part. Kit tossed the ball up and hit it. She knew about the apartment. She helped pick it. The closets were her concern. A pause. She had opinions about a second bedroom. Kit was quiet for a moment, rallying in automatic rhythm. Then, Nor, is Greg home? He got back Tuesday. Platform issue. They sent everyone home early. I hit a ball that landed exactly where I wanted it to. He doesn't know anything. Are you going to tell him? I thought about Greg Sweet, big and quiet and sincere, with his genuine handshake and his Casa Sweet keychain. Patricia will handle what needs to be handled legally. Beyond that, that's his wife and his marriage. I looked at Kit across the net. But he's going to find out. Things like this always come out. Yeah. She bounced the ball twice on her paddle. What's the plan for Ryan? When does he find out you know everything and not just the shower part? There's an HOA meeting next Tuesday. Kit stopped moving entirely. She looked at me for a long beat. The HOA meeting. Saguaro Ridge holds one every other month. This one was already scheduled. The illegal listing of a property in the subdivision is, technically, an HOA matter. The listing agreement Ryan signed has some irregularities that I suspect the board would find interesting. A pause. And the neighbors should know what's happening before the divorce filing becomes public record. Kit stared at me. Then a smile started, slow and wide. You're going to do it in front of everyone. It's the appropriate venue. Patricia is going to file the divorce and the injunction Monday. The papers will be served Sunday evening. So he'll have one day of knowing before Tuesday. Kit put her paddle hand on her hip and just looked at me. I love you so much. She picked up her ball. Can I come to the HOA meeting? You're on the guest list. We played for another 40 minutes, and neither of us mentioned it again. Saturday evening, Greg Sweet knocked on my front door. He was wearing a company polo and had the slightly worn look of a man who's been traveling, the kind of tired that comes from being somewhere loud and industrial for 3 weeks. He smiled when I opened the door. "Nora girl, hey, is Ryan around? I wanted to see if he wanted to watch the game tomorrow." I looked at Greg Sweet and felt something that I will describe carefully. Not guilt, not pity, but a kind of sorrow for the particular shape of what was about to happen to him, which was not his fault and not something I had caused, but which was going to arrive in his life regardless, and would be worse, not better, if it was delayed. "He's not here right now. Greg, can I ask you something?" I leaned against the doorframe. "How are things? How's Dana?" He shrugged in the uncomplicated way of a man who hasn't yet had reason to think the question had weight. "She's good. Quiet while I was out. She always gets quiet. You know how it is." He paused. "She mentioned you guys haven't connected in a while. Everything good?" "We're working some things out." I looked at him. "Greg, if you ever need to talk to anyone, or if things get complicated in the next couple of weeks, I want you to know you've got people on your street, okay? I'm saying that as your neighbor." He gave me a curious look, the look of someone who's received a message in a language they're almost fluent in, but not quite. "Okay, thanks, Nora." He shifted his weight. "Tell Ryan I stopped by." "I will." I watched him walk back across the cul-de-sac to his house. The sun was going down over the Sonoran, and the sky had gone that particular shade of dark orange-pink that only happens in Arizona in the summer, and the lemon tree was casting a long shadow across my backyard, and I thought, 14 months ago, Dana Sweet stood at my door and handed me a key and said, "Mi casa es tu casa." And I had meant exactly as much as she had. Sunday evening, Ryan's face when the process server knocked on our front door was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not with satisfaction exactly, but with a particular precision, the way you remember the exact moment a complex proof resolves. He stood in the entryway holding the envelope, and he looked at the papers inside, and he looked up at me, and his face went through about 6 expressions in the space of 2 seconds. Confusion, understanding, denial, calculation, something approaching fear. "You're filing." "Yes." "You went to an attorney." "She's excellent, Patricia Steele. I'd recommend her if you weren't going to need your own." He set the papers on the bench by the door, the same bench I'd set my bag on the morning I came home to find the shower running. "Nora, I think we should talk before you do something permanent. I think we owe each other that." "I agree, except that permanent is already what this is. It's been permanent since January 14th, when you emailed Lawrence Pell about your options for minimizing my settlement." I watched him go still. "I read your drafts folder, Ryan. Did you know Gmail saves drafts automatically, even the ones you don't mean to save? It's a very helpful feature." The color went out of his face. He opened his mouth. I watched him search for something to say and find nothing adequate. The divorce filing also triggers a financial restraining order. The house listing has already been taken down, which I imagine Mitchell Draper has been in touch about. The Copper State Credit Union account will be part of discovery. All 41,000 of it. A pause. "You should call your attorney, Ryan. Tonight." He stared at me with the expression of a man who has walked into what he thought was an empty room and found an audit in progress. How long have you known? Long enough. I turned toward the hallway. I'll be staying in the house per the temporary orders. You should make arrangements. He was on the phone with Lawrence Pell within the hour. I know because I could hear him on the back patio, his voice low and urgent, the particular cadence of a man explaining a situation that has escalated beyond his management. I made chamomile tea and sat in the living room and reviewed my documentation one final time for Tuesday. I didn't sleep well the night before the HOA meeting. Not from anxiety. The planning was done, the case was made, everything that needed to be filed had been filed, everything that needed to be documented was documented. It was something more like the hum of a very large machine that's been set in motion and is now running under its own momentum. I lay in the silence of the bedroom. Ryan had relocated to the guest room Sunday night quietly, without discussion, and I listened to the house breathe around me. I thought about the first night we'd slept in this house. We'd had an air mattress and no furniture yet, and we'd ordered pizza and eaten it on the living room floor, and Ryan had made a joke about roughing it, and I had laughed and felt entirely, specifically happy. I thought about the lemon tree, the sapling Ryan had driven 40 minutes to a specialist nursery to find, because he'd read that only certain varieties did well in the desert heat, and he'd wanted to get it right. I thought about 3 trips to Home Depot for the right shade of warm linen paint. I thought about the Ho newsletter I used to read cover to cover, every issue, because I found the small dramas of neighborhood governance genuinely amusing. I thought about Dana on my patio in the evenings, laughing. I thought about the 23 times the smart lock recorded her key. I thought about what Ryan had asked his attorney in January. If the house were listed before the divorce filing, what claim would his wife have on the proceeds? And I thought about what his attorney had probably told him, that she would have full claim, that this was a marital asset, that a unilateral listing wouldn't hold. And I thought about how Ryan had done it anyway, had bet on the timeline, had bet on my not finding out in time. People make this mistake about competent women. They see the professional skill and they think it's a performance mode, something that turns on at the office and off at home. They forget that the ability to recognize a financial pattern doesn't stop working because you love the person who created it. It just takes a little longer to look. I got up at 5:30 and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my folders spread in front of me, not reading them, I knew them by heart, but just having them there. The house was quiet. The lemon tree outside the sliding door was barely visible in the pre-dawn dark, a dark shape against slightly darker dark. I had everything. The bank records, the power of attorney with the date and my documented incapacity. My doctor's records showed a telehealth visit that day, confirming a COVID infection with significant symptoms, which was exactly the kind of thing that made a signature contestable. The January attorney email, the transfer records, the smart lock log. Patricia Steele had all of it, and so did the Meridian forensic team I'd quietly consulted on a hypothetical scenario basis without naming names, just to get the framework confirmed. I also had one more thing, something I hadn't told Kit, hadn't told Patricia, hadn't mentioned to anyone. I'd found it on Ryan's laptop on night 3 in a folder labeled Dana, M-I-S-C, that contained, among other things, a series of emails between Ryan and Dana from late March in which they discussed the financial plan in explicit terms. Dana knew about the bank account. Dana knew about the house listing. Dana had written in her careful, pleasant syntax via email, "I know it feels like a lot right now, but it makes sense to get your situation stable before everything goes public. That way you have options." Dana Sweet had known about the $41,000. She had known about the power of attorney and the house listing. She had not simply been Ryan's affair partner. She had been his strategic accomplice. And she had been using my spare key to spend time in my house while I paid the mortgage on it. I drank my coffee in the silence of my kitchen and looked at the lemon tree, and I thought, Tuesday at 7. The Saguaro Ridge HOA meetings were held in the community center's main room, which had folding chairs and a long folding table at the front and industrial lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell. Attendance was usually about 15 to 20 people. The engaged residents, the complainers, the people who'd come specifically because they had an agenda item. July's meeting had a listed agenda: irrigation system maintenance update, holiday lights competition pre-registration, guest parking violations discussion, and new business. I had submitted a new business item on Friday: concerns regarding an unauthorized real estate transaction affecting subdivision covenant compliance. The HOA president, a retired dentist named Jerry Tompkins, who wore short-sleeved dress shirts and took Robert's Rules of Order very seriously, had confirmed it for the agenda with some curiosity. I arrived at 6:50 with my folders and my laptop and Kit, who had dressed for the occasion in a silk blouse and her best jeans and had spent the drive over elaborating her alternate plans for the evening in a way that was purely for morale. I still think the bumper stickers have merit. Bad at secrets. Very clean messaging. I'm going to go a different direction. I know. I just want you to know options exist. We took seats near the back. The room filled gradually. The Garcias came in and waved. Brad and Jennifer Kowalski settled in near the front. Jerry Tompkins arranged his papers with ceremonial precision. Various neighbors I recognized from block parties found their seats. Ryan was not there. Ryan had received Patricia's email advising him that attending the HOA meeting would be inadvisable given the ongoing legal proceedings, which was advice he had apparently taken. The meeting opened. Jerry moved through the first 3 agenda items with his customary methodical thoroughness. The irrigation system needed a new valve on Sector 4. The holiday lights competition would accept pre-registration starting August 1st. Guest parking violations had numbered 11 in the last cycle, which was 2 more than the cycle before, and this was discussed with the gravity it apparently warranted. And our final item is new business. Nora Cash has submitted a matter for discussion regarding a real estate transaction. Jerry looked at me over his reading glasses. Nora, the floor is yours. I stood up. I carried my folders to the front table. I connected my laptop to the projector that Jerry had set up without my asking, which I appreciated. I looked at the room. 15 people, all of them neighbors, all of them familiar faces, some of them now turning toward me with expressions ranging from politely curious to somewhat alarmed, which was the reasonable response to a neighbor arriving to an HOA meeting with folders. Thank you, Jerry. I'll try to keep this concise. I pulled up the Zillow listing screenshot on the projector, the listing that had been live for 4 days before the cease and desist. Our house's address and asking price displayed in clean sans serif font. 3 days ago, the property at my address was listed for sale on Zillow and other real estate platforms without my knowledge or consent. This is my home. I am a co-owner. My co-signer on the mortgage is my husband, Ryan Bliss. I paused. A real estate transaction affecting a property in this subdivision requires full compliance with our covenant agreements, including standard disclosure of all legal co-owners' consent. That consent was not obtained. The listing has since been taken down following a legal cease and desist, and a divorce filing with associated asset freeze orders is now in effect. The room had gone very quiet in the particular way of rooms where people are doing rapid internal calculations about what they knew and what they should have known. I'm raising this at an HOA level because any offers that were submitted against that listing in the 4 days it was active may create legal complications, and the board should be aware that the property is under judicial hold. No sale of this property can proceed without court approval while the divorce proceeding is active. Jerry Tompkins was writing on his legal pad with the focused expression of a man who was going to have this notarized. Brad Kowalski raised his hand. Nora, did you know this was coming? I knew as of last Thursday. And Ryan is handling it through his own counsel. A neighbor I knew less well, a woman in the third row named Helen something, turned slightly toward the woman next to her and murmured something. The room had the low background hum of 15 people processing information simultaneously. I was going to continue. I had additional documentation to present, the account transfer records that were relevant to the marital asset question, when the community center door opened. Dana Sweet came in. She was wearing a yellow sundress and had her hair in its usual ponytail and was carrying a large tray of lemon cupcakes with cream cheese frosting. Because the HOA meeting was the kind of neighborhood event where Dana Sweet brought lemon cupcakes with cream cheese frosting. And she had apparently not received any updated information about the nature of this particular meeting. She stepped into the room with the ease of someone who is always welcome places. She scanned for the refreshment table, which was near the door. She set the cupcake tray down on it. She looked up. Her eyes found me at the front of the room, standing at the projector, and she went completely still. I looked at her. Hi, Dana. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. Nobody reached for a cupcake. I watched the room in my peripheral vision, the slow, collective understanding moving through it, connecting what I just said to the familiar face of the woman who brought cupcakes to every HOA meeting and had a husband who worked offshore and a spare key to my house. The silence was very complete. Jerry Tompkins cleared his throat with some authority. Thank you for the refreshments, Dana. He looked back at his legal pad. An admirable commitment to procedure. One man, Roger, from the house on the corner, who I had spoken to exactly 3 times, slowly reached over and picked up a cupcake. He peeled the wrapper with the careful attention of someone performing a delicate operation. He took a bite. He moved to stand against the far wall, looking at the floor, chewing in absolute silence. Dana Sweet sat down in a chair near the door. She did not look at the cupcakes. She did not look at anything in particular. Her hands were folded in her lap with the particular stillness of someone who is trying very hard not to appear to be doing anything with their hands. I do want to add, for the board's documentation, that the listing agent, Mitchell Draper, may be contacted to confirm the cease and desist and the current legal hold status. I looked at Jerry. I can provide the court filing reference numbers for the board's records. Please do, Jerry said, and wrote something with underlines. I sat back down. Kit, beside me, was looking at the middle distance with the expression of a person exercising heroic restraint. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. The irrigation valve was assigned to a subcommittee. The holiday lights registration was confirmed. Someone raised the guest parking violation issue again, even though it had already been resolved, but Jerry handled it with his characteristic thoroughness. Dana Sweet sat near the door through all of it without moving. When the meeting adjourned and people began to gather their things and filter out, she stood up carefully and picked up the tray, most of the cupcakes still on it, and carried it toward the door. I was gathering my folders when she paused near me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, very quietly, with difficulty, "Nora, I looked up from my folders. I looked at her, really looked at her, the way I hadn't let myself look at her since the bathroom, since the lock logs, since the email that said, 'I know it feels like a lot right now, but it makes sense to get your situation stable.' I looked at my neighbor and my friend and the woman who had 19 times let herself into my house with a key I gave her because we were practically sisters. Quietly, without cruelty, without warmth, 'My casa is no longer your casa, Dana.' I picked up my folders. Simply, 'I'll need that key back.' She set it on the table without a word, the little copper key on its house-shaped keychain. She walked out with her cupcake tray. Kit picked up the key from the table and handed it to me without comment. We walked out into the July evening, into the blast furnace heat that even at 8 o'clock felt like standing in front of an open oven. And we got into my car, and I sat behind the wheel for a moment with the key in my palm. "You okay?" "Yeah." I closed my fingers around the key. "Yeah, I am." "What now?" "Now Patricia takes it from here." What followed was not fast, because legal proceedings are never fast. But it was thorough because I made sure of that. Patricia filed the formal divorce petition on Monday. The asset freeze covered the house, the joint accounts, and, once discovery compelled disclosure, the Copper State Credit Union account, the balance of which Ryan had spent down by $9,000 in the 10 days between my discovery of it and the freeze order. The court took note of this. Courts tend to take note of asset dissipation during proceedings, particularly when it's documented in a forensic accounting format with timeline notations and annotated transaction records. The house listing was formally voided. The limited power of attorney was challenged and successfully set aside. My doctor's records confirming my incapacitated state on the date of signing, combined with the narrow scope of what Ryan had told me I was signing versus what the document actually authorized, gave the court enough to work with. Mitchell Draper, to his credit, cooperated immediately and completely once he understood the situation, because Mitchell Draper had no interest in being part of a fraud proceeding. Ryan ended up with a settlement that was, by any reasonable measure, significantly worse than what he would have received if he had simply filed for divorce without the financial maneuvering. The hidden account, the attempted asset dissipation, and the fraudulent power of attorney created a presumption of bad faith that the court factored into the property division. He kept his car and his retirement contributions and very little else. Lawrence Pell, his attorney, sent Patricia a professionally cordial note that I imagine concealed significant frustration. The $41,000 was classified as marital asset dissipation and factored into Nora's share of the settlement, which meant she received compensatory value from other assets that would otherwise have been divided equally. She did the math herself. She always did the math herself. Regarding the Copper State account and the divorce attorney consultation in January and the manner in which the power of attorney had been obtained, Patricia had been very clear about the range of legal exposure this created. She had advised Ryan's counsel of this clearly and specifically because she was not the kind of attorney who left things ambiguous when ambiguity served no one. Ryan had made certain financial arrangements by way of settlement that I believe reflected his understanding of that exposure. Greg Sweet filed for divorce from Dana in September. I don't know what conversations happened in the Sweet household. That was not my business, and I did not involve myself. Greg knocked on my door once, a few weeks after the HOA meeting, and stood on my doorstep with his hands in his pockets and said, "I didn't know. Nora, I want you to know, I didn't know any of it." I had nodded and said, "I know you didn't, Greg." He had nodded once and walked back across the cul-de-sac. The Sweets house went on the market in October. A legitimate listing, both names on the disclosure. It sold in 11 days. Dana's famous cupcakes were not mentioned at the subsequent HOA meeting in September, nor at any HOA meeting after that. The refreshment table was reorganized. Someone brought a fruit platter. It was, in Jerry Tompkins' words, formally a sensible choice. It is now 8 months since the Thursday I came home for a forgotten laptop. The house, my house, in my name, on my terms, has been painted. Not the living room. I left that warm linen because I liked the color and it had nothing to do with Ryan. But the guest room, which I turned into a home office, is now a deep slate blue that I selected myself without a single trip to Home Depot because I knew what I wanted and I bought it, and that was the end of it. The lemon tree is in its winter dormancy, which in Arizona means it's still green, but the fruit is gone. I gave the last of the fall harvest to Jennifer Kowalski down the street, who makes a lemon curd that she puts in little labeled jars and distributes to the neighborhood at Christmas. I kept some for myself. I made tea with it on the December evenings when the temperature actually dropped and I could light the fireplace and sit with a book and the silence of a house that belongs entirely to me. Kit came over for New Year's. We played pickleball in the morning, 8:30, slightly unusual. We'd moved our session to accommodate her mother's visit. And then she came back to my place for dinner. She brought wine. I made pasta. We ate it at my kitchen table, which I had refinished again in the fall, this time with a slightly different stain that I liked better than the original, and the difference was small, but it was mine. You know what I was thinking about, Kit said, pouring more wine? Bumper stickers. The cupcakes. She leaned back in her chair. She walked in with cupcakes, Nora, to the meeting where you were explaining the fraud to the entire neighborhood, with the tray. She didn't know. That's what makes it beautiful. Kit shook her head, still smiling. I have never in my life wanted a cupcake less than I wanted one at that moment. Roger ate one. He was very committed to that cupcake. He stood in the corner for 20 minutes. She raised her glass. To Roger. To Roger. I thought about Dana's face when she'd walked into that room. Not with pleasure. I am not built for pleasure in other people's humiliation. Not really. Not even when they've earned it. I thought about it with something closer to clarity. The complete picture, finally assembled. What you see when you have all the pieces and you step back. Ryan was in an apartment in Scottsdale. I knew this not because I followed his life, but because Saguaro Ridge is a small neighborhood, and information moves through it the way water moves through sand, slowly, thoroughly, inevitably. He was dating someone, I'd heard. I wished her, with complete sincerity, good documentation practices. I got up and took the wine glasses to the sink and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. The lemon tree in the winter dark, its leaves still green and dense and full of the particular quiet patience of a thing that is alive and waiting and not worried about the season. I had given Ryan that tree, in a sense. He'd driven the 40 minutes, he'd researched the cultivar, he'd planted it with his own hands. And the tree had kept producing long after everything else he'd planted here had been cleared away. I thought that was probably fine. I thought I could live with that. The copper-colored spare key was in the kitchen drawer, the one by the stove where I kept miscellaneous items, batteries, rubber bands, the flashlight I always mean to replace. I'd put it there in August and not thought about what to do with it. The little house charm was slightly tarnished now. I'd had the front door rekeyed in August, obviously, so it didn't open anything anymore. It was just a key on a charm. Kit was saying something about a new restaurant she wanted to try, someplace in Tempe. I turned back from the window and sat down and poured the last of the wine. "Tell me about it," I said. And she did, and the evening continued, and the house was warm and quiet and full of the right kind of sounds, and somewhere outside, the lemon tree stood in the dark and waited for spring, which would come whether we thought about it or not, because that's what seasons do. They come and they go and they come again. And the things that survive them survive because they were built to last. And the things that don't. I finished my wine. For the first time in a long time, it didn't taste like anything I needed to identify or analyze or trace back to its source. It tasted like mine.